There is a certain kind of person who can walk into a perfectly normal room and immediately feel like every single eye is on them. Nobody is staring. Nobody is whispering. The room is just a room. But their brain has already launched a full investigation. Did I say hello too eagerly? Is my voice too loud? Did that person just look at me and then look away? Why did they look away? Most people would call this shyness. Or maybe just nerves. But what's actually happening runs much, much deeper than that. This is not about being shy. This is about a mind that has turned itself into its own harshest audience. A mind that watches itself the way a director watches a scene, frame by frame, floor by floor, over and over again. And if you recognize this feeling, even just a little, stay with me. Because what you're about to learn might finally explain something you've been carrying for a very long time. Today we are going to decode the psychology of people who are too self-conscious. Not the surface level stuff. Not just be more confident advice that doesn't actually work. We're going to go underneath, into where this comes from, how it actually shows up in real life, and most importantly, what people who carry this burden can do to finally feel lighter. Because here's the truth that most people miss. Extreme self-consciousness is not a personality flaw. It is a psychological pattern. And like all patterns, once you understand it, it loses its power over you. Let's begin. Before we look at the signs, we need to ask the right question first. Why does this happen? Why do some people move through the world feeling completely invisible in a healthy way, while others feel achingly, exhaustingly visible, even when no one is actually watching? Psychology points to two primary roots. The first is what researchers call shame-based early conditioning. Think about a child who was frequently corrected in public. Maybe a parent who snapped at them in a grocery store for being too loud. A teacher who called on them in class and laughed when they got the answer wrong. A household where mistakes were treated as performances, something the whole family watched and remembered. That child learns one devastating lesson very early. Other people are always evaluating me. And that lesson doesn't stay in childhood. It grows up with them. The second route is social comparison overload. For the first time in human history, an entire generation has grown up seeing curated, filtered, and perfected versions of other people's lives, every single day. And the brain, which evolved to measure social status constantly, doesn't know the difference between a real social threat and a highlight reel on a screen. It just keeps comparing. And comparing. And comparing. Both routes lead to the same place. A mind that has learned to treat itself as a constant object of public judgment. Even when the public isn't watching. Here's what this looks like in real life. They send a text and immediately reread it 3 times wondering if it sounded weird. They walk out of a job interview and instead of feeling hopeful, they spend the next 4 hours replaying every single sentence they said, picking apart each pause, each word choice, each moment they stumbled. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect. It's a well-documented cognitive bias, the tendency to believe we are being noticed, observed, and judged far more than we actually are. A classic study from Cornell University showed that people consistently overestimate how much others notice things like what they're wearing, how they look, or how they performed. But for someone who is deeply self-conscious, the spotlight effect is not occasional. It is the default setting. Their brain runs a background program that never closes. It whispers, everyone noticed. Everyone remembered. Everyone is judging. And the exhausting part? The program runs even when they're alone. Lying in bed at 1 a.m., their mind pulls up a conversation from 3 years ago and replays the moment they said something slightly awkward at a party. Not because it mattered, but because their brain never got the signal to close the file. Here is something most people never realize about self-conscious people. They are often some of the most socially skilled people in the room. Wait, that sounds like a contradiction. But it isn't. Because they have spent years, sometimes their entire lives, carefully studying how to appear normal. How to laugh at the right moment. How to make eye contact, not too much, not too little. How to respond to a question without sounding too eager or too distant. They have essentially built a performance. A polished, rehearsed version of themselves that they put on like a costume every time they walk out the front door. Psychology calls this self-monitoring. And at high levels, it becomes a full-time job. The problem is that performing is not the same as living. They might have a wonderful dinner with friends, good food, real laughter, genuine connection. But the moment they get in the car to drive home, the review starts. Did I talk too much? Was I boring? Did I overshare? Did they notice I seemed nervous in the beginning? The evening that should feel like a gift gets quietly dismantled on the drive home. They were present in the room, but a part of them was always sitting in the back row, watching, grading, critiquing. And over time, that split takes a toll that goes far beyond social situations. Here is where self-consciousness becomes truly costly, because it doesn't just affect how they feel inside. It starts to quietly reshape the decisions they make on the outside. They don't raise their hand in the meeting, even though they had the best idea in the room. They say "I'm fine" when a friend asks how they're doing, because explaining the real answer feels like too much exposure. They don't post the thing they created, don't apply for the opportunity, don't speak up when they should, because their brain has already run the simulation of what happens if people judge them for it. And it decided it wasn't worth the risk. This is what psychologists call behavioral inhibition. The nervous system, in an attempt to protect from social pain, begins choosing invisibility over opportunity, safety over growth. The cruel irony is this. The self-conscious person desperately wants to be seen, truly, authentically seen, for who they really are. But the very fear of judgment keeps them hiding the exact version of themselves that people would most connect with. They perform the safe version, and then feel unseen anyway. That gap, between who they are and who they allow the world to see, becomes a quiet source of loneliness that's very hard to explain to people who don't carry it. There is something else that happens when a person lives in constant self-observation. They become very, very careful about showing emotion. Crying feels like weakness on display. Anger feels like losing control in public. Even excitement feels risky. What if I seem too much? Too intense? Too needy? So they learn to manage, to regulate, to keep the volume low. On the outside, they often seem calm, composed, even-keeled. But inside, those emotions don't disappear. They just move underground. Neuroscience has shown us that emotional suppression, the active effort to hide or contain what you feel, doesn't reduce the emotion. It actually intensifies the internal experience while masking the external one. The body still carries the full weight of the feeling. It just doesn't get to release it. Over time, this creates a strange kind of exhaustion. They are tired not from doing too much, but from containing too much. From holding themselves so carefully together in public that by the time they get home, they have nothing left. And the people closest to them, the ones who want to truly connect, often feel like they're reaching through glass. They can see this person. They just can't quite touch them. This is the deepest layer, and the one that keeps everything else in place. It works like this. They feel self-conscious in a social situation. They then feel ashamed for feeling self-conscious. Then they feel embarrassed that they're ashamed. Then they go home and replay the whole chain of events, judging themselves for every link. Psychologist Brené Brown's research on shame describes this pattern clearly. Shame thrives in silence and self-judgment. It tells us that our flaws are not just things we do, they are things we fundamentally are. For the self-conscious person, a moment of awkwardness doesn't feel like a rough patch. It feels like evidence. Evidence of a deeper, more permanent defect. See, I knew I was too much. I knew I was too awkward. I knew I didn't belong. And that story, repeated enough times, starts to feel like fact. This is why simple advice like just be yourself lands so hollow. Because the very self they're being told to express is the one they've been taught to be most afraid of. So what do you do with all of this? You cannot think your way out of self-consciousness. You already think too much. That's part of the problem. What actually works, and what research consistently supports, begins with one radical, uncomfortable idea. You are not the main character in other people's stories. Not because you don't matter, but because everyone else is also the main character in their own story. That person across the table who you think is judging you, they're quietly wondering if they seem weird to you. The spotlight is not on you. Because everyone is carrying their own spotlight, pointed inward. The second shift is learning to separate observation from judgment. Self-conscious people are actually very aware of themselves, of others, of the room. That awareness is not the problem. The problem is the instant evaluation that follows every observation. They can learn, slowly, with practice, to notice without immediately grading. To catch the thought that was awkward and add 3 quiet words, and that's okay. The third shift is perhaps the most powerful. Chosen vulnerability over accidental exposure. Self-conscious people spend enormous energy trying to control how they are seen. But the moments that actually build real connection are not the perfectly managed ones. They are the honest ones. The imperfect ones. The ones where someone says, "I'm nervous about this," or "that was harder than I expected," and the other person exhales with relief because they felt it too. Real belonging doesn't happen when you get the performance right. It happens when you let the performance go. If you recognized yourself in any of this, in the replaying, the shrinking, the exhausting performance of just being in a room, I want you to hear something clearly. You are not broken. You are someone whose mind learned, somewhere along the way, that the world was watching. And it built the most sophisticated alert system it could to protect you. That alert system is not your enemy. It just needs to be retrained. The depth of awareness you carry, that sensitivity to how things feel, how people respond, how the room shifts, that is not a flaw waiting to be fixed. It is a form of intelligence waiting to be redirected. Leave a comment below with the sign that felt most like you. Because the moment you say it out loud, it already has a little less power over you. If this gave you something to think about, or something to feel, hit like and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. You might not know they needed it. But they'll know. I'm Apex. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And until then, be a little gentler with yourself. You've been working very hard inside that head of yours. See you in the next one.